I think you asked a really good question, and I think first I want to appreciate your guys' work in Karachi, because I think Legal Aid Society does some excellent work, and obviously I'd want to appreciate AGHS's and HRCP's long-standing work on prisons. It's what we learned from at JPP. I think we're all talking about great ideas, but when we look at, I think there are two things that I think one must understand when we talk about the history of prisons in Pakistan. Number one, the history of prisons in Pakistan is not a federal history. It's a very provincial history. And the state of each province's prisons, and the evolution of each province's prisons, who is in that prison, what is being criminalized, what are the facilities, and what are the remedies, are all kind of deeply rooted in our history. And that history begins from I'm not just talking about pre-partition or the formation of Pakistan times, I'm talking about it evolved primarily and it's rooted in colonial times. And we just recently published a book on prisons, which looks at each province's history in the context of its prisons. The reason I say that is partly because I'm a history major before I was a lawyer. And I think that when you get a good hold on history, you can actually devise better strategy. In that book, when we looked at the statistics and the historical perspective and the anthropological and socio-political context of each province, what we found was that today, and predominantly in Punjab, today you see the criminalization of diversity. In Sindh, we see criminalization of ethnic diversity as subnationalism. In KP, we see the criminalization of dissent as militancy. In Balochistan, we see the criminalization of disenfranchisement as separatism, right? Again, these are not just like partition histories, these are pre-partition histories. This is how the colonial lens saw people in that province, and this is how they lay down. Now, who is in our prisons today and how are they treated is demonstrated, and it's kind of engulfed in the prison rules. You know, we talk on, and I'm talking to you out of frustration of many years of being on various committees, federal and provincial, like our colleagues have been. And I think the last committee that I've been on, I've just literally stopped. Because I feel like, I know that in prison reform, whether it's data, whether it's anecdotes, whether it's experience, there have been 1 million publications under every administration, under every high court, under every provincial administration. There has been a committee on prison reforms. And you know, when we started to thinking about writing a book, the first thing we noticed was, I don't think we need to write a book, we just need to publish a bibliography, because there were thousands of reports. And so the last committee that we were a part of, we literally went and they said, what are your recommendations? And we said, well, there's 75 years of recommendations. And primary amongst them has to be that you have to reform the prison rules. Punjab has the largest prison population of Pakistan. It has the most amount of jails. It has the most resources to tackle it. Punjab is the only province that has not reformed its prison rules. Punjab is sitting on a set of draft rules that are the most expansive, in line with all the international conventions, done with all of the stakeholders present. The Law Ministry, the Advocate General's Office, the Prisons Department, the Health Department, the Home Department, all of them together. We are not here to talk about anything else, any reform, until we speak about changing the DNA of how Punjab prisons operates. That has to be number one. And any discussion otherwise is a waste of time. It's a waste of my time as an activist. It's a waste of the government's time. And the reason I'm saying this, I'm clearly frustrated after many years of being on these committees. My advice to all of the fellow activists here would be simple in some ways. I think, and I see this, and I'm very glad you guys took away my first point, which was that I think we need to rely on data and look at the data just apart from the top surface level data, but really go in and analyze it. Because the stories on how to convince the administration comes from the data, whether it's the court or the administration, especially when we're talking about capacity issues, right? I can give you stats on overall prison population in Pakistan, 135%. But when you go down to the provincial level, and you see the difference, right? For example, Punjab's overcrowding is at a different level than Sindh's overcrowding. The next question to ask is, well, who's in those prisons, right? Punjab is talking about, look how much money they have, right? Because you're building new prisons all the time. My question is, who's being criminalized in Punjab, right? And when we looked at those rates of criminalization, we found that it's, and another strategy, again, the strategy that we are going to be pushing for in the next coming years is the decriminalization of poverty. Because when we went down into the nitty-gritty and looked at who is in prison and what are they for, we were able to look beyond the overcrowding stat, right, which is 135% national, and it's at Zile. My data person is sitting there. She's going to throw a shoe at me if I get this wrong. Under trials, it's 68% in Punjab, it's 77% in Sindh, it's 80% in KP. This didn't mean that much to me. And my challenge to Zile and our data team was, tell me more, right? Who are these people? And what we found was, it was in the last, for that we needed to go to the Punjab police, right? They do publish their figures. 41,837 arrests in Punjab alone for crimes of begging, water theft, kite flying, sound system violations, and the Smoking Act. Just to give you an example. These people do not belong in prison. Like you mentioned, they belong in other, we need to decriminalize poverty as a first attempt, and we need to bring in actors apart from just the poor Punjab Prisons Department. Right? The health department has a role to play. The police department has a huge role to play. The psychiatrists have a huge role to play. So we need to look outside of the usual suspects to bring about change. The other thing I'm going to just say, and then I'm ending, is that, and this is just an advice from what I've learned and what we've learned from dealing with many, many, many governments and many committees, which is, I think it helps in the long term when you're dealing with the state. And again, we've seen many versions of the state coming up again and again. I mean, I've lost count of how many governments have been in Punjab. Somebody asked me recently, how many governments ago was this? And I said, I'll tell you how many years ago this was, because that's a simpler question to answer than governments. Is that be technical and be non-political. My politics begins and ends with the people that I represent. Those are the prisoners of Pakistan, at home and abroad. This might be the very wrong forum to say it. I'm not talking about your personal politics. I'm talking about my politics as, the executive director of an organization that deals with any and every government to advise them on strategies of political reform. Unless they know I have a lot of personal politics. Those belong in my personal arena, not on my social media. And the last thing I was going to say is that, we need to engage with the various governments and the courts, by the way, on sticking to and getting the government to publish their data so that we can analyze it. Finally, we cannot talk about prison reforms or prison overcrowding or any of these issues without talking about accountability and an independent accountability mechanism. And the latest thing that JPP is pushing for is a tribunal, a prisons tribunal in Punjab that would be based in each of the 9 divisions as a go-between between the courts, the High Court, and as a means where the prison rules could be applied, both for service matters and for prisoners. They can represent themselves there. They don't need to engage lawyers. Lawyers find it easier to go there as well. So we're trying to think out of the box, because either the government should be implementing the 75 years of recommendations, or they should be looking at the data to devise strategy, or they should be, or we should be suggesting to change the system, because the current system and the legal framework as it works, beginning with the prison rules, does not work. Thank you.